Hi, this is Roger Weston. I'm here in my library and office and just been reading To Build a Fire by Jack London. So I thought I'd talk about it a little bit today. It's a story I've read many times. It's a great story. Jack London, written by the great author Jack London, who he was a writer, but prior to that, he was worked on a sealer back in the 1800s. Worked on a sealer in the Pacific, and went on to cross the Yukon. Became a miner back during the gold rush, and so he's got an amazing background for some of his stories. He wrote the famous story called Call of the Wild, which is another great one I'll probably be talking about pretty soon. And so anyway, today I'm talking about To Light a Fire, and what I call, it really illustrates what I call the second law of survival, which is humility. Now, the first lesson under the law of under humility, the second law of survival, is a humble man sees his weakness and compensates for his vulnerability. Now, that's very important. A humble man sees his weakness and compensates for his vulnerability. That contrasts dramatically with a proud man who sees his strength only or primarily and proceeds carelessly. Just let me give you an example from the story of this. This story is about a young man who's going to meet up with his friends way out in the Yukon, which is he's hiking alone, which is something to be frowned upon in general, but specifically when it's 50 to 70 below zero and you're going through dangerous, treacherous country over long distances, and you have no experience or very little experience, then that's not good. So here, anyway, so we've got this young man, and it says an intangible pall hung over the face of things. So he's out there, he's got the great white silence spread out before him, nothing but whiteness and bleak, fearsome, daunting land as far as you can see, but there is no land. It's all frozen ice and snow, and that's all he can see. And it's 70 below zero, and even his dog, his husky, is cringing in intimidation by the sight before them. But not this man. He has no worries whatsoever. He doesn't see anything to worry about. And it says, an intangible hull hung over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark. And that was due to an absence of the sun. This fact did not worry the man, it says. So, a proud man sees his strength and proceeds carelessly. So again, the first lesson of humility is a humble man sees his weakness and compensates for his vulnerability. That's a lesson this young man has not learned. So, just to give you an example of what it was really like, it wasn't just cold out. It was a tremendous cold. And it says it made a tremendous cold. It made no impression on the man. I used to work in a freezer, and for 12-hour shifts up in Alaska, in the lower part of a ship, they have a massive freezer. And I worked there 12, 14-hour shifts, and it made an impression on me. When your fingers go numb, the cold, and it wasn't even 70 below, except when we went in the blast freezer. It wasn't even that cold as compared to what he was in, and it made no impression on him. When your fingers are numb, it ought to make an impression on you. When you can't feel your toes, it ought to make an impression on you. But he says here, it made no impression on the man. He was a newcomer in the land. That's a big clue. He probably came from New York City, and he thinks he knows everything, and nobody can tell him anything. So anyway, he wasn't worried. There's nothing some backwoods Alaska could do for a guy like him. But anyway, he was without imagination. He couldn't even imagine the kind of things that might go wrong in a situation like that. It's 80 odd degrees of frost. It did not lead him to meditate on his frailty as a creature and upon man's frailty in general. So the second law the second lesson of humility under the second law of survival. A humble man watches, listens, and perceives. A humble man watches, listens, and perceives. A proud man speaks and acts thoughtlessly, assuming he will dominate. All right. So it's the third law. A humble man knows his weakness and prepares. He counts the cost. He knows his weakness and prepares. But however, on the other hand, a proud man overestimates his strength and underestimates the cost. All right. So he boldly stalks out into the unknown during treacherous conditions. And it says here he plunged into the spruce trees. The trail was faint. It's snowing. It's not much trail there. Nobody else has gone before him at this time. Lately. In fact, he carried nothing but a lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. So he goes on a trip like this. He carries nothing but lunch wrapped in a handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It's 70 below, and he was surprised at how cold it was. So, and he doesn't really take much in terms of supplies. All he really takes is a sandwich. So, the fourth law of humility, or the fourth point under the second law of survival, is humility prepares, pride scorns. So, we'll get more into that shortly. The fifth law, humility respects God, nature, and circumstances. Pride expects God, nature, and circumstances to be impressed by him. So here's a quote from the story. The animal, referring to the husky, the animal was depressed by the tremulous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. It's now 75 below zero. So humility respects God, nature, and circumstances. Pride expects God, nature, and circumstances to be impressed with him. The sixth point under the second law of survival is humility walks in the spirit and wisdom. Pride walks by flesh and vanity. So here in the story we see an example of this. The dog, it says here, the dog dropped again at his heels, the tail drooping with discouragement. So you can see this husky who's born and bred and raised in Alaska, and this is his life. And it says here he drops his tail in discouragement. He's like cringing under this frigid Arctic weather system. And it says the man responded differently, though. He wasn't so intimidated like this pathetic dog. I'm looking at it through his point of view. This weak dog. He was much more given. He was not much given to thinking, and just then, particularly, he had nothing to think about save he would eat lunch at the Forks. So, his only concern really is his flesh. He just wants to eat. He's not thinking about. He's not concerned. So the sixth law again: humility walks by the spirit and wisdom. The pride walks by the flesh and vanity. So this guy is focused just on his sandwich. He's not worried about the wisdom and the wisdom of what he's doing. Okay, so seventh law: humility respects elders and their wisdom. Pride scorns them and ignores them. So if we look at, here's a quote from the story. The man from Sulphur Creek to the old man. The old man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling them how cold it could sometimes get in the country. He had laughed at the time. So the young man had scorned the old man, laughed him off as a fool. The old man who knows Alaska like the back of his hand. This newcomer laughed him off with scorn. So again, the seventh law, humility. Seventh law of the second law of survival: humility respects his elders and their wisdom. Pride scorns and ignores them. Eighth law. Okay, humility benefits from preparation. Pride stumbles in the end. So here's a quote from the story. He should not have built the fire under the spruce tree. So in other words, he's out there, he's already fallen through the ice. He's in serious danger of prompt death because it's 70 below and now he's wet and he's got to take off his clothes and try to get dried out. And he builds the fire and by some miracle he gets the fire going under a tree. So he's got all this overhanging snow on the tree branches, and you've got now this warm, hot smoke going up there. And next thing you know, it melts the snow, and a ton of snow comes cascading down and puts out his fire, burying it in a pile of snow. And then it says here, he should not have built the fire under the spruce tree. Well, humility benefits from preparation, and one of the part of preparation when you're doing a major, serious, voyage like this. This is the kind of hike where people die, and so is learning some basic survival and basic outdoorsmanship, and maybe just some. That's pretty much what. Maybe ask a few things, ask a few extra questions of the old man in Sulphur Creek. But pride stumbles in the end, and that's what happened to him. He kind of set out, no cares whatsoever, and in the end, now his fire's out, and his hands are rock solid. He can't even make them work to light any more matches, and at this point, time is running out fast. So the ninth law, or the ninth lesson under the second law of humility is pride sees truth in the end. So pride finally learns its lesson, but it may be too late, as it was in this case. So here's a quote from the story. As the man is freezing to death, he's no longer able to make his hands work, his feet don't work. He's just finally succumbing to hypothermia and basically about to perish. He says, "You were right, old man," or "You were right, old hoss. You were right," the man mumbled to the old timer of Sulphur Creek. So finally, the young man learned that he should have listened to the old timer, but unfortunately, he put himself in such a perilous situation that it's over. So it's a good story. It's called "To Light a Fire" and by Jack London. Thanks for watching.